All right, welcome to WAY2B TV, where there's a better way to be than atheist or theist. I've got a little bit of special stuff tonight, I think. There's an atmosphere of doubt and confusion that I believe surrounds most human knowledge, all but the most narcissistic of fundamentalist atheists and narcissistic of hard atheist, theist, seem to understand this. I'll tell you a little story about going home. We're glad to be back, and we're glad you all gave us the time to go do that. We're working on trying to take a laptop up to, the iPad went off, or the little tablet went off. At any rate, we thank you for letting us get up to Tennessee and have some time to celebrate Joni's birthday. While I was home, or right when I left to come back to Florida, I discovered that, I was backing out of the carport, and Joni was screaming as we backed out of the carport, wait a minute, and my daughter was in the car with me, and she said, your tire's flat. And we got out, and my front right tire was flatter than a flitter. It was on the ground, and so we needed an air compressor in order to be able to pump it up and get it repaired. And the air compressor my son had borrowed, and it was over at his house locked up. And my daughter called him at work, and he said it was locked up inside. And so she had to get a ladder in order to get up to get the key where he has it hidden is too high for her to find. And so she got in the house and got the air compressor, brought it back. We pumped up the tire. She and I, with a whole back seat full of livestock, cats and dogs and so forth, drove over to the tire store that I used to go to with my parents when I was a child, and we got there, and they were still right where they used to be, and they were still open. Had been doing business for, 58 years or 60 years or something like that, they said. But at any rate, because they were new when I was a kid, but so they $22.26 later, they had fixed my tire in about a half hour. Well, while we were sitting there waiting on the tire repair, my daughter read from her phone. She's earning her PhD right now, and she was still working on it. She works all the time like I do. If she has an idle moment, she tries to get on something and keep going. And she was working on her papers for school, and she said she wanted to read a poem to me. And so she read from her phone and then emailed me the poem by Lang Knotts, which at least to me expresses this doubt and confusion we feel related to knowledge. It embodies a point of view which may just describe the discomfort felt by most who debate atheism and theism. And I'm going to read it to you carefully. But I know in our discussions here on our Sunday afternoons, and sometimes I think for some people on WAY2B TV, we experience this angst or this doubt and this confusion about talking too seriously about and allowing ourselves to think about aspects of religion, aspects of Jesus, and aspects of theism and atheism that maybe we're not all that comfortable talking about. And of course I am, because I enjoy the scholarship of it all, and I know some of you all have been raised like I was in a fairly conservative fundamentalist home, and you may or may not be too comfortable with some of everything that gets said. But the poem reminded me, and I asked her to email it to me because it reminds me of the fact that we all basically struggle with the same thing. And I want you to know before I read it that this poem is me, and I think this poem is probably you. I think this poem is probably everybody, as I said, except for the most narcissistic of atheists and theists who seem to think they know the absolute truth about things. And it just talks about knowledge and how most of us feel about knowledge. So let me read this poem. There is something I don't know that I am supposed to know. I don't know what it is I don't know, and yet am supposed to know. And I feel I look stupid if I seem both not to know it and not know what it is I don't know. Therefore I pretend to know it. This is nerve-wracking since I don't know what I must pretend to know. Therefore I pretend I know everything. I feel you know what I am supposed to know, but you can't tell me what it is because you don't know. That I don't know what it is. You may know what I don't know, but not that I don't know it, and I can't tell you. So you will have to tell me everything. I just think that's a neat poem. And we all feel like that. We all feel like we're the ones, a lot of times we feel like other people just know a lot of things that we don't know. And we probably should know it, but we don't even know what it is that they know that we should know. And I think most people feel that way. It's reciprocal, and all the time we struggle with that. And so if someone talks to us about something that makes us uncomfortable or makes us think about things in a way that we don't normally think about them, then we struggle with this idea that we don't really even have a right or a way to speak to the subject. And we don't realize that in my case, as a teacher, I feel exactly the same way as you do. Whether you're atheist or theist or somewhere in between, I have that same angst. I wonder if there's just something I'm missing here, but I don't know what it is. But I bet you know what it is. But you don't know that I don't know, and I don't know what it is I don't know, and so forth. And so the poem just runs us around and around in circles, but everybody feels like that. And I think if we all realize that, we could talk about almost anything, because we would realize we're all in the same boat, struggling with the same confusion and trouble with our thoughts. So tonight we continue the WAY2B, recovering from too much religion. We began last week by saying that so many conservative Christians today claim to be sure they know the absolute truth. Yet Jesus is reported to have said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who know they don't know about spiritual things. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Theirs is peace within. Theirs is contentment." And so tonight we will finish out the so-named Beatitudes. These seem to be the key to the so-named Sermon on the Mount. They're the beginning of them. And the Beatitudes is really simple. I talk about them so much that when I put in my notes what I want to talk about, I just put a little set of brackets and it just says, "Do the bees." That's what my little set of brackets says. It just says, "Do the bees." And then I can talk about the Beatitudes all day long. And so be thinking about tonight the question about if we are humble about spiritual things, will it make us more content? If we are humble about ourselves, will it make us more content? If we're gentle in the relationships that we have, will it make us more content, more comfortable? If we are struggling for what is right and don't really know for sure what is right, but we struggle with it and we hunger for it, we hunger and thirst for it, as Jesus said, will it satisfy us? Just the quest alone, will it satisfy us? If we don't respond in kind often, we don't get responded to in kind often. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy, Jesus said. Are we more content when we are merciful? Because what's coming back to us is also that kind of mercy quite often. If we have pure motives, if we are pure of heart, as Jesus said, if we have pure motives. Heart was known as the seat of emotions in Greek. In Greek, the word is cardia, and like cardiac, okay, the heart. Well, blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those with pure motives, for they shall see theos. They shall see, and for some people that means they shall see God, and for some people that means they shall see the goodness in people. For some people it means that they shall see the theos in other people. Important stuff. And then if we try to make peace between every two persons, if we don't worry so much about our own position in life, but we want other people to be content with each other and therefore the things that we do and the things that we say and the things that we think will cause that to happen, as opposed to sowing the seeds of dissension, which is always just us trying to manipulate the situation. We should never sow the seeds of dissension between people. But does all that really make you content? I've always wanted a group of people who appreciate this subject to tell me, will that make you more content? Because my experience has been, it will. That is, if you simply lighten up. Yeah, I think the whole Sermon on the Mount probably should have been named Chill, because people who are not so uptight and aren't always trying to be better than the other person, trying to excel in spite of the other person, that type of person seems to always be content. You can set them down anywhere. They're comfortable in their own skin. They have nothing to prove. These are all things that I attach to the Beatitudes. So be thinking about tonight's questions as I move through the contact information, and then we'll begin the discussion about it as Joni and I get started. So let's look at the contacts here. As we move through this evening, we want your questions and comments. There are several ways to do this. First, callers can call 863-940-0047. Secondly, we have an active Twitter feed on screen throughout the broadcast. Just tweet hashtag WAY2B We are in startup mode, so when Twitter is being used, we keep it on the screen, and when no tweets are coming in, we keep it off the screen. We see all the incoming tweets regardless on our screen, and so that we'll turn the Twitter on when we see that people are using it. And the chat room is open. Both Joni and I monitor the chat room. And I've been encouraging Joni, and I think this helps, because you all know I get to talking and I run off like a freight train. And so if she sees that the chat room is busy, I've told her, because sometimes Joni is just too polite for words. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but she's a very nice person. But I've said, just interrupt me. Just go ahead and say, at least you've got something on the chat room you need to tend to. And then I'll finish up my thought and jump on it. But it helps me. So she and I are both watching the chat room closely. You can interact with us in between broadcasts by email at interact@way2b.org. I just got an email from Amber just a few seconds ago, and she gave me her email address, and I'll sign her up for the newsletter before I go to bed. And she'll get Saturday morning's newsletter with the archive of this show in it, and then continue to get newsletters every Thursday and every Saturday morning. You can text the WAY to 22828 to receive our newsletter each Thursday morning. The newsletters have the direct link to the broadcast, and the newsletter also contains the discussion starter videos we'll be using on Thursday evening. Finally, to receive direct notices each time we upload, please subscribe to our WAY2B TV channel on YouTube. When you see the WAY2B TV logo in the bottom right-hand corner, you can do so directly by clicking on it, and this would help us greatly. So let's go to Miss Joni here. Hang on a minute here. There we go. All right. Joni, what do you think about our tonight's question? Are we more content if we are humble about spirituality, humble about ourselves, gentle in our relationships, open and vulnerable about knowing right and wrong, not responding in kind, having pure motives, and being one who brings people together? What do you think?
You can't hear me. That's what I think.
Huh?
I didn't think you turned my sound back on.
Yeah, your sound is on.
Okay. Of course we're more content if we don't dwell on ourselves, we dwell on other people, period.
Right. It's a way of focusing on who am I for the world. It's a gift that you give to other people. If you work on yourself, then other people will experience you in a better way. And I think that's what Jesus was talking about. I think it's really all he was talking about. And it's so simple that we want to reject it, because we need this complicated matrix of religiosity to keep us going. And we need 750,000 words when only 4.5% of them are attributed to Jesus in the first place. So when you get right down to it, we have this massive Bible, and the part that even has Jesus' words in it, you could hold between two fingers very close together, just like that. And it's amazing that we have turned religion into such a gigantic thing.
It's just kind of shocking.
It is shocking. And once you realize it was so simple, you begin to understand why the man had a following. He had a following because they appreciated his teaching, and he was talking about the things that concerned them. He was talking about the things of life that made their life better. And he was talking about the addiction or the enslavement of religion in their lives as well. And we've already been through the woes to religion. And he talked about that figure of speech, the kingdom of heaven, the basileia orenos, the kingdom within your sovereign self, that place where theos dwells. And so that's what the basileia orenos is. It's the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. Basileia theos and basileia orenos are both used throughout the Gospels, and they mean practically, or maybe the same thing. There is some argument over whether the basileia theos is the kingdom on earth that they all were waiting on in the first place. Jesus was a Jewish man. He was a Jewish teacher. He went around teaching Jewish people. And he did talk about the kingdom of God, if some of the Gospels are to be believed. The one that wrote the Sermon on the Mount, though, he talked about the basileia orenos, the kingdom of heaven, which is the kingdom of the unknown place where God dwells, the kingdom within your sovereign self. But there was no streets of gold and mansions and pearly gates. There was no such concept whatsoever. Jesus never mentioned or talked about it. And the only reason that we think about those things is that they're in a book called Revelations, which was written at the end of the first century. And Jesus never said a word about any of that. And so I think that's pretty important stuff. What do we got, Joni? We got anything going on in the chat room before I introduce the video?
Just a little bit back and forth.
You know, you guys get going talking about everything. We were talking about our dogs and our cats and everything else before Jan and Mary got on. I noticed they're on there now. Let's see. What does Jan say? I think that is good way to be, Amber. I've never been competitive with or jealous of people, Amber says. Yeah, absolutely.
Not competing with other people, only excelling himself.
Jan says comparing oneself to another always ends badly. Isn't that the truth? Colleen says it gets exhausting mentally and physically trying to keep up with the Joneses. Right. Jan says are we supposed to be doormats or let people run all over us? I think that's a really good question, because a lot of people look at the Sermon on the Mount like that. Have you? I think of that in terms of our reaction. No, I'm not a doormat, and people don't run all over me. But there's a couple of things that I do to manage that. One is, if it's people I don't need to be in the presence of, I just wind up not in the presence of them. And that seems to work out really well. But sometimes you have to politely, very politely, tell someone, a good example probably is the Bridge Club. I like to talk about the Bridge Club sometimes, but there are people who are just too darn serious about their bridge. And they will get very vocal about how stupid that play was, or aren't you watching, or whatever. And the response that I usually have to them, because I'm a newer bridge player, I've been only playing a couple of years. Some of them are gold life masters, been playing for 30, 40 years. And I just simply look back at them, and if they say such a thing to me, I just simply say, well, you're a better player than I am. I'm not very good. And they don't really know what to say about that. They really don't. I hold my own. I do all right. I've got master points. I'm a junior master. I became one last year. I'm working on being a club master. I don't feel bad about myself or bad about the way I'm playing bridge. I'm learning all the time. But sometimes you'll run into somebody who, as Jan says, you become wants you to be this doormat, and they want to run all over you. Well, there are ways to handle that. There's ways to handle that without becoming belligerent. And that's really all I'm trying to say there. Jan says, how can we tell the difference in being humble and being taken advantage of? Well, you can be humble, even in trying to manage not being taken advantage of. Probably one of the best examples of that is I've been approached a lot as a minister at churches by people who wanted money. They would say, you know, I've got to have a uniform for work. I've just gotten a job and I don't have a uniform, but I have to buy one before I go to get my job in the morning, and I need $20 or $30 or something. Or I've run out of gas and we can't get home, and I need gasoline in my car, and I need $10 to put gas in my car. Those sorts of things. There's some wisdom involved in all that. I had an arrangement with a gas station. I had a youth minister who would get in his car and take somebody to Walmart and buy them a uniform. And so you can handle that, because we all know, you don't have to be ignorant, we all know that sometimes people want money, not for uniforms to work in and gasoline to get home or groceries or anything else. They want the money to buy alcohol or drugs or whatever. There's a reason why they're down and out. And I worked with the homeless every week in Nashville at the homeless shelter downtown. So I do understand all that, but there's ways to manage that in such a way that you don't have to let them walk all over you. You don't have to let them use you. Instead, you can help them. You can help them, but still avoid the very problem that you're worried about. And I think the same thing is true. And there's a million solutions for it. I think a lot of it just boils down to your visceral response to things. Because if your only way to be humble, or your only way to not be taken advantage of, is to be belligerent or to be combative, then I would advise you to dig down into what Jesus had to say and start trying to implement it into your own life, because it's not a choice between being taken advantage of and being humble. Amber says, Mom's better at it than me. Colleen said, some days. Amber says, remain humble because that reflects your character. But if someone is continuing to disrespect you, I think that starts crosses into being taken advantage of. Colleen said, great analogy, Amber. You know, the one thing I would tell you there is you need to think about, again, everybody can't be everybody's friend. Everybody can't be in the presence of everybody. Everybody can't spend a lot of time with everybody. And so there's management that goes on. Some people may be in a state in life right now where they've got enough troubles in their own life that they simply want to back off for a while. And so they simply remove themselves from the situation. Have you ever had somebody do something? I worked for a man named Ben Gay. That really was his name before the product, okay? But his name was Ben Gay. And Ben had taken he was the president of an engineering firm I worked for. And he had taken some drawings to be copied and blueprints printed and to be sent out of state to someone. And the blueprinters had mistakenly sent the original vellums, the original mylar, rather, of the drawings themselves that we had created in my engineering department. And he was livid because he needed those, and we needed to work on those. And these were preliminary things. And so our originals were gone. They were out of state. We had nothing to work with. He was so angry. I mean, he could hardly speak, and he was on the phone. I was in his office. And I heard him say to the man, I'm going to need, and just said it very calmly, he said, I'm going to need to call you back because I'm a little upset right now. And so I'm going to call you back after I calm down. And we do need those drawings to work with, and in the meantime, see what you can do about retrieving them. And so I thought that was pretty interesting, because all he did was remove himself from the situation. And it didn't mean that what the guy had done was not a boneheaded stunt, but it did mean that Ben was not going to gain anything by jumping all over this man. So I think that's pretty important. It's also the name of the engineering firm is kind of funny because his name was Ben Gay, and the name of the engineering firm was Hussey, Gay and Bell. And I asked him one time, I said, if you're the president and founder, why isn't your name first? And he said, would you, and they worked internationally. They worked for Saudi Arabia. They did all kinds of stuff. But he said, would you name an engineering firm Gay, Hussey, Bell? I thought it was pretty funny. Anyway, Jan said, at least I concur. Your bridge analogy is about someone else's behavior and not your response to their behavior. Absolutely. Hi, Carol. We're glad you're there. Glad to see you got on. So it sounds like we got the whole crew again tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce this video, and we're going to watch it. This video is this evening. We're looking at the opening assertions of Jesus in the so-named Sermon on the Mount. Was Jesus actually telling his listeners they would be more content in life if they changed their inward way of being to this inward way of being that he talks about? Are there really opening statements? And then he follows through and says, what does this mean in your life? And then he follows through and he gives 3 illustrations of law and how it affects that, changing from a way of doing to a way of being. And then there are 3 illustrations of ritual in the temple, in the church. And he talks about how it changed from a way of doing to a way of being. And then he went through all kinds of illustrations about turning the other's cheek, walking the extra mile, all that stuff that you know so well, the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, all those things. He goes all the way through talking about the Pharisees and the scribes, and he even gets down to the end and he talks about the resilience that will be in your life at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, using the illustration of the man who built his house upon the rock and the man who built his house upon the sand. But the Sermon on the Mount actually has a contiguous line of thought. And all my life, all I've heard is snippets. And this is the part of the WAY2B that I love teaching. I love teaching because the whole Sermon on the Mount is less than 15 minutes. It's about 13 minutes and 30 seconds or so. That's all it is, if it's spoken out loud. I had the little man in my computer read it out loud to me, and I timed the recording. And it's a very short amount of advice. But it's wonderful, and it helps us understand just exactly what we're talking about the difference in your life by simply adopting a different way of being. I get so tired of watching both fundamentalist Christians, sometimes I call them hard Christians who are fundamentalist Christians, debate what I call fundamentalist atheists who are called hard atheists, because both sets of people seem to have little regard for the relationship that is in this conversation. In other words, making your point is more important than anything else. And so, they use sarcasm, and they use hurtful things, and they call each other stupid, and they talk about people's arguments being ridiculous, and all these sorts of things. And sooner or later, it seems to me that they're accomplishing nothing at all, other than creating ill will between the two of them. And then after they get apart, I go to their websites and to their other YouTube channels where they're not together, where they're talking to their own people, like I'm talking to you. And I'm hearing each one, the fundamentalist Christian and the hard atheist, on their own YouTube channels with their own audience, and they're talking about the other person off camera, where they're not together. And then the conversation becomes even more critical and more ugly. And so I think that's very, very, very important from the standpoint of the way the theist-atheist argument is handled today. Let's see, before I launch the video, Jan says, so if someone I don't like someone and ignore them, does that make me a bad person? And, well, I don't know about don't like. You might could put it a different way and come up with, I can be in the same room at the same time with anyone on this earth. I think there are a few people that really get under my skin, and it's difficult, but I can do it. But that doesn't make you a bad person because you purposely monitor the amount of time. And I'll just use language I don't normally use, but it's nothing wrong with monitoring the amount of time you spend with somebody who pisses you off, okay? I mean, it's really not a problem with spending less time with someone that makes you uncomfortable. I don't see that as a problem. Whatever. Amber asked you to rephrase that, Jan. So let's see if you did. Yeah, she did down here. What does it say? It says, sure, if someone ignores another due to them setting boundaries, does that make them a bad person? And just from what I just said, no, I do not think it makes you a bad person. Colleen said, I don't think so, Jan. Jan said, well, how can your sisters judge you as a doormat, Colleen. And Colleen says, I don't behave the way they do in situations or the way they think I should behave. Well, we all have that problem. If you're in any kind of marginalized community and you're in any kind of minority status in this country, you probably have at least a number of relatives and a number of friends who see you as lesser than. They see you as someone easily criticized. Let's see. Colleen says, I don't behave that same. Jan says, seems like their issue, not yours. And Colleen says, it annoys them, so they harp on me. Well, let me start this video, and then we'll come back to it. Here we go. There's a better way to be than atheist or theist. It surprises me that the most vocal of theists and the most vocal of atheists often take the ancient text literally to promote their own arguments. What if the ancient writers, writing long after Jesus died, simply misrepresented him to promote their own growing religion? Suppose Jesus, real or imaginary, was neither supernatural nor an idiot. We began in the last video with an ancient writer's depiction of Jesus' opening line. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The word for spirit is pneuma. The idea is that one is more content in life if they are not all that in a spiritual bag of chips. I'll let you watch that last video if you want to know more about that. This opening concept concerning humility and spiritual knowledge was then linked to humility before other human beings. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The second statement is complementary to the first. In essence, the ancient writer represents the speaker to have begun with, Blessed are the humble about spiritual things, and continued with, Blessed are the humble about themselves. I experience contentment most profoundly while lamenting my own condition, not everyone else's. By mourning the condition of another human being or group of human beings, I am not content, I'm not blessed. Does one find contentment by feeling better than? Perhaps the ancient writers simply proposed consider those regretful about their own condition, for they will find more contentment. The ancient writer has Jesus continuing with still another axiom of relationships. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the gentle, or blessed are the weak, as in some translations, seems to extend the speaker's line of modest thought. Is it physical strength to which the speaker refers, or is it to being strong-minded, headstrong? When I pursue life by knocking down doors, I triumph over resistance. When I focus on my own goals, with little regard for what is happening to others in my wake, I win over them. I prove I am able to provide for myself in spite of them. I'm better than they are. When I value relationship over ownership, I see natural provision in all the earth and its inhabitants. That is, I inherit the earth, my needs, through natural resources and through other persons. I inherit an appreciation for it all and for them all. Likewise, I am part of that provision for others. A gentle way prevents me from worrying about the contest. I have nothing to prove. Content are the gentle, for they shall appreciate whatever is provided. Next, in the ancient writer's representation, the ancient speaker addresses contentment within the struggle to be this way. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. This nutritional metaphor is simple to see. One cannot at the same time hunger and thirst for something and be full of it. If I claim to be all full of righteousness, others will indeed think I am full of it, but it will not be righteousness they perceive I am full of. Am I so desperate to make my point I ride roughshod over relationships? Do I know what is right and what is wrong with such certainty? As the ancient writer will illustrate in a few moments, this is how I get what I want, with no regard for what is happening in my own wake. In the way, righteousness, what is right and what is wrong, is expressed only with uncertainty. While one should always seek right, one should resist imparting it. Content are those who continually search for what is right, for they shall be satisfied by the quest alone. The fifth opening statement concerns the positive results of having this way about you. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. From the standpoint of human mercy, when I forgive, I also experience the forgiveness of others. When I respond in kind, less often, others respond to me in kind, less often. Mental charity begets mental charity. Whenever one makes mistakes, inward mental mercy yields better consequences all around. Content are those who give others the benefit of the doubt, for they will also receive the benefit of the doubt. The ancient writer then turns to the results of this way of humility. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see theos. The writer seems to refer to those with this way about them as the pure in heart. The Greek word for pure refers to a way of life. The Greek word for heart denotes the innermost person. Anciently known as the seat of emotions, the viscera are the internal organs. Your visceral response, gut reaction, is a result of your inward being. The ancient writer states such people shall see theos. It's impossible to know how much of the theos language is the ancient speaker and how much of it is the ancient writer decades later. All of the writing is from scuttlebutt long after Jesus died. But if one believes in a supernatural God, one might see this statement as, because you perceive your God's presence within yourself, you will probably perceive that God's presence within others. If you don't believe in a supernatural God, you might suspect that the ancient speaker said, "Content are those with this way about them, for they shall see the good in one another." The ancient writer then depicts the ancient speaker's conclusion concerning the resulting reputation of being in this way. He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of theos." Does this 5-second soundbite refer to matters of warfare and peacemaking between nations? Hardly. The statement refers back to the line of thought in the 23 seconds that precede it. Could it be that the speaker was known to have spoken of personal relationships and the actions resulting from them? With this way about us, we draw people together. Followers of the way want peace between every two persons. Therefore, the ancient speaker may have spoken of the one having this way about them as a child of theos, or perhaps as simply a child of goodness. So far, what has been proposed requires only 29 seconds to read aloud. Yet the ancient speaker seems to be making many claims concerning my happiness. I would be content by being poor in spiritual prowess, content about myself, gentle with others, not imparting right, charitable in thought, and having pure motives, while drawing people together. As a result, I would be at peace within, without judgment for others, content with what I have, satisfied with the right I find, able to forgive myself and to forgive others, and I would see good in others as they would see good in me. This short, simple opening line of thought may well be the summation of what the speaker continued to say in the so-named Sermon on the Mount. Ask yourself as we move through these videos, could this contiguous line of thought be similar to what Jesus taught? Those he taught were known not as Christians, but as people of the way. Was Jesus' line of thought supernatural? Or perhaps, was it just naturally super? All right, so let's see what we got on the chat room. It says, it is their issue, Colleen says, so I bite my tongue and walk away instead of engaging in a battle. Jan says, absolutely, I agree, Carol. Carol said, don't allow another person to steal your joy. And I like that phrase because that's exactly what I've heard a lot of people say. My grandparents used to say that quite a bit. Don't let other people steal your joy. It really is up to you. It's not something that that you have to do. You don't have to enter into it. One of the ways that I usually try to express that is that probably the best way to put it is don't let someone else make you other than who you are. You get to decide who you are. And so that's what Jesus was talking about. This way of being is something you create within yourself. It's something you work on. It's your project. Now, incoming from other people and other things and circumstances in life, that's different. When all that's incoming, do you consciously make a choice I'm not going to let that person make me someone else. Just because they get in my face, I don't have to get in their face. Just because they're belligerent in their speech, I don't have to become belligerent in my speech. Just because they use sarcasm and those sorts of things on me, I don't have to be sarcastic right back. Now, a little sarcasm when you're playing around and trying to create humor is not a bad thing. But at the same time, all Jesus was talking about was that. Now, you probably noticed in the video, I try to be a little bit careful about trying to be as neutral as I can related to the theist and the atheist and their belief or disbelief in God. In that, depending on how you see theos, and that's why I use the term, I told you that in a video here a couple of times ago, I use the word theos instead of the big G God or the little g God, because there is no such thing in Greek as a big G God and a little g God. As a matter of fact, theos is used even for a pagan god. Theos is used when they're not referring to the God of the Jews, the Yahweh. The theos is used for God, G-O-D, whether it's a big G God or a little g God. And so I try to use that, and then people can plug in what they want to based upon where they are in life. I think a person's beliefs and disbeliefs are up to them. And they acquire those over a lifetime, and they have that belief set that they want and they need in order to manage their lives. Most all of you all already know I do not believe in the supernatural, but I do believe that the following that developed behind Jesus had to be developed from something else. It was not developed from supernatural stunts. It was developed from some wisdom. And that's what I hope we're hearing in the Sermon on the Mount, is that wisdom about how to be and how to get religion off your shoulders, to get religion, keep religion from ruling your life. And to the scribes and Pharisees in the temple, 613 Jewish laws were causing them to have to struggle in life. And Jesus says, you don't have to do that. You can be yourself, and you can develop a way of being that will make you content in spite of all of that. Everyone needs boundaries, Amber said. And I think people will find themselves unhappy when they don't have any. What was you going to say, Joni?
She meant not everyone needs boundaries, but she thinks that people find themselves unhappy when they don't have them.
Oh, when they don't have them, yeah. That is why I left Florida and no longer call two women friends. No boundaries, and they knew everything. And everybody knows everything. They just don't know what they don't know, and they think you might know it, and so forth. Remember that poem? Anyway, Jan says, do we need to be around people of similar mind, or does that isolate us or assist us in finding the way? Colleen says, if similar-minded aren't we then limiting our ways to learn new things? I don't think the answer is in either or. I think it's in both and. I purposely involve myself with people who are outside of my paradigm. And maybe how I got like I am today, I don't know. But I'm a lifelong learner. I love exposing myself to all kinds of things. If I'm a strong person inside, and I know how to control my emotions and my way of being, then I should be able to enter into most any arena. However, as I said earlier, we also have times when we want to be with our own folk. I enjoy this show. I enjoy you all in the chat room. I enjoy the people in the 4 churches that Joni and I served. The fact of the matter is, there were people in those churches that we love until this day. There were some wonderful people who had this way about them, who were wonderful, wonderful people. There were other people who I'm kind of glad I won't have to fiddle with them anymore. I mean, that's just how that is. And we're human beings. That's how that's going to be. Colleen says, if similar-minded, see, I already did that one. Jan said, Colleen, is one a behavior, the other knowledge, or something else? And Colleen says, I like Lisa's answer, both. I think we definitely need to manage our lives. There's no reason why you would fill your life with people who make you feel bad. There's no reason why you'd fill your life with, I don't want to live all day long in a long struggle in a some kind of hypothetical argument with somebody. I don't mind talking to anybody about anything, but at the same time, I regulate how much time I spend on what things. There are people who I love deeply, but who still have great criticism for me given my own cultural circumstances. I simply meter the amount of time that I have with them because it gets me down. It gets me vulnerable. It makes me difficult. It makes my life difficult to manage if I spend too much time with it. I've spoken at universities all over the United States about the subject of my life and my circumstances. I've been invited to some of the nicest universities in the country, Ivy League universities even, into medical schools, even to seminaries. And so one of the things that I found was I don't mind speaking about those things. I don't mind getting up in front of an audience, but you know what? I probably don't really want to do it over maybe once a month at most. And the reason for that is if I do a whole lot of them together, it causes me to have low times in my life because I don't like rehearsing everything. And it's what everybody wants to hear about is the difficult things, the hard things, the things that hurt you. And, everybody don't want to talk about all those things all day long, every day. And I know I don't. So I think all of us spend time regulating our lives. We all spend time trying to manage our lives. And each of us has to manage our way of being. We have to decide who we are. And I realized I was looking at the other screen, reading the chats as I was talking, and I should be looking at you. Sometimes I forget to do that. Carol says, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. It doesn't mean it's permanent. And Colleen said, very true. And that's certainly the case. Just like with what Ben said to the guy who messed up the blueprints and the originals. You don't have to continue that conversation right now. I don't know how many of you all have done it, but I have done it. And it's been done to me when I've upset someone. I've had someone say to me, Elise, I'm going to have to re-enter this conversation with you tomorrow or on another day because at this point I'm not able to manage the kind of attitude that I want to have in this conversation. That's a really honest statement. And if anyone ever makes that statement to you, you got to realize that's a wonderful thing. That's them saying, I really do want to talk to you. I want us to maintain our relationship, but I'm letting myself get upset. And I've had to do the same thing. I don't know how many of you all have, but chat about it if you have. But it's an important thing to be able to do. Sometimes you just have to walk away, even if you walk back into the situation on another day. Colleen says that we have an inner filter. And Jan says, vexation to your spirit. You may want to explain that one a little more, Jan. And Colleen says, oh, I like that phrase. Maybe Colleen needs to explain it because I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean. Do you know, Joni, what she's saying? What's she saying?
Well, I'd be afraid to guess. I would assume that it means that there are things that people say and do that attack and down spirit you. That's vexing.
Yeah, I get that.
Vexation to your spirit means that it's something you need to walk away from.
Right. I get that, yeah. And that does happen. I've had that happen to me a number of times over the past several years even, where I just have to say, okay, that particular environment is just not, I want to give a lecture sometimes. I want to say, because I know there's some ladies sometimes I'd like to say to, because they are so, praise the Lord, righteous kind of deal. And I want to say sometimes, are there times in your life when all bets are off and all of the things that you say the church has taught you about what Jesus thought you ought to be or how you ought to be? Are there times when all that's just called off? In other words, if you face the right situation and the right person, then you have carte blanche on just to become a whole different person.
I think you're talking about their gut reactions. They're not real great.
Yeah, the visceral response. Right, the visceral response. Colleen says, Elise, I move Oh, I moved every 2 years when my dad was active duty. So I learned to adapt and mind my P's and Q's. Okay? Colleen, your fingers didn't slip on that one. I could read the whole thing. Um, yeah, and I think that's fair. I was in the same boat because my dad and mom moved up to Cincinnati, and then they moved back to Tennessee, and they've moved around several places. Joni and I have moved several places. We were in Savannah, we were in Nashville, we had a church in Indiana, I had a church in Massachusetts, of course the one down here. So, yeah, you begin to realize there's ways to acclimate that won't keep you upset all the time. Colleen says, my siblings and I learned when battle might be needed too. Jan says, minding P's and Q's is good as long as you are not compromising your values. Yeah, and I think that's always a hard line to draw, is to decide, because I really don't want to, I don't want to placate another person, and I don't want to kowtow to another person. In other words, I don't want to just accept the views. I try to find, if I disagree wholeheartedly with what you just said, I try to find a polite way to express the difference. A lot of times it comes in asking a question. Have you ever done that? Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about if that's so? Then da 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 da. You know, and then you're able to talk about it, and it might keep the conversation going where it's not combative at all, but you've been able to express the fact that you didn't quite agree with what was just said. And sometimes we have to do that, I think. But I hardly ever just get back in someone's face or go at someone. I always feel terrible, by the way. And Joni knows the few times in my life, even in owning my engineering firm, the few times in my life that I have actually gotten rough with someone, or I have gotten determined or angry or whatever with someone in a meeting or something, I wind up on the phone that afternoon hunting for them so that I can tell them I did not handle that correctly, and that I would like to enter that conversation in a more balanced and humane way. I can't handle that. I can't. I've tried to teach myself not to be that way, and sometimes, you know, somebody has found my button, which is pretty hard to find. I had a guy in seminary tell me one time, he said, nobody can get your goat if they don't know where it's tied. And so sometimes they knew right where my goat was tied, and I would then wind up apologizing, because I really don't want to come at someone that way. I never have, and hopefully never will, Jan. My values may have cost me a friend or two, but I feel okay at the end of the day. That was Colleen. And Jan says, that's the bottom line, Colleen. And Colleen gives us a smiley face. Carol says, my mom always says that you have to pick your battles. Yeah, my mom said that too, Carol, and I think that's very, very, very good advice. Sometimes the battle is not worth having. There are times when the battle is important, but even then, you can be more determined than you are belligerent. You can be insistent, and you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a healthy discussion. Joni and I went to a church one time, long ago when we were really young, called Southeast Baptist Church, and at that time, they had the reputation for being able to argue about anything they wanted to in a business meeting, and the two people who were on either side of the argument, let's say, maybe two people on either side of the argument, you know, if it was two ladies, they'd wind up going to lunch together. If it's two men, they might wind up going fishing or hunting together. But there was purposeful motions made after the meeting by the people involved in the discussion to make sure that no relationships had been broken. And I always admired that. You don't see that so much in churches. And that church did later split. They got into a huge battle and they split wide open. And that church had two pastors. And they were 40 years old, and they had two pastors, 20 years each. And so that church was known for being at rest, being at peace, being able to deal with the pastor and all that kind of stuff in a kind way. And then eventually a pastor who was serving as an interim decided that he wanted the job, and he began to campaign and politic within the church. Camps formed, as they always do in that situation. It's something an interim pastor should never do. It's unethical. And the camps formed, and people got on either side of it. The guy wound up being the pastor of the church, and the church wound up being half the size it was before, because about half the people left. And so sometimes battles are seem almost necessary, but they come out pretty bad. Colleen says, I have felt horrid after getting my Irish up at times. Hate how it makes me feel. Me too, Colleen. It can make you feel lousy. It really can. Carol says, I still wish I could re-meet the old man at Publix who stole my parking place. My visceral response was not good, I'll bet. Carol,
you fix that is you give it up to somebody else some other time.
Well, Carol, I'll tell you, up here at Publix, a man came out of a gas station and went straight across the street into the Publix parking lot right in front of me, and I had to dodge him on the road where he came right out in front of me, and I wound up in the Publix parking lot also because of it, and then I was in front of him. Well, he got madder than all get out about that because he thought I was racing him or something. And so he followed me all around the Publix parking lot. And when I got out of my car to go in to do my grocery shopping, there he was. He was up in my face in the car. And I just rolled the window down. And he screamed at me and yelled at me and said every manner of thing about me. And I don't know what brought me to presence of mind to say this or not. I said, you're not having a very good day, are you? That's all I said.
I'm sure that poured salt in the wound.
No, he went off like a piece of dynamite after I said that. But at any rate, and then I found some friends from here in the park at the grocery store, and that man was in the grocery store too. And he was coming up the aisle, and I was at the end of the aisle, and I saw my friends, and I pulled my little scooter over there beside my friends, and I said, would you stand here with me for a few minutes? That man up there is had some road rage, and he's really, really mad at me, and I don't want him to talk to me. And so they stood right there and talked to me until he went away. I just thought that was so cool. But at any rate, yeah. So if you ever see that little man at Publix, just tell him you were having a bad day. Jan says, we are not perfect. It is a process. And Carol said, what did you say, Joni? Because she said, I will, Joni.
I don't know.
You said something.
I did.
And I didn't pay you any attention, did I?
No.
So, at any rate, Jan says, Mary and I have always said that life and our spiritual growth is a journey. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, y'all better get your comments in because we got 4 minutes. Actually, we have 1 minute. It's 8:29 on the computer clock. So we have 1 minute. So you might want to get your stuff in. But while you're thinking about that, it is time to go. And so thumbs up if you like it. Thumbs down if you don't like it, which I cannot imagine why in the world you'd want to do that, but thumbs down if you don't like it. And share, subscribe. See you soon. Post it on your Facebook page. There's a share button below every show and a share button below every video. And if you click share, you can. It has a little Facebook, a little Twitter, and a little Google Plus icon down there. You click on them, and it will post it on your Facebook page. And that would be very helpful if you would do that. Colleen says, I agree, Jan. Thankfully, I am still on the learning curve. Yeah, we're all on the learning curve, and we'll be on the learning curve for the rest of our lives, most likely. Jan says, aren't we all? Say what, Joni?
That's the way it works.
That's the way it works. Well, it is 8:30 straight up and down. Carol says, give up the parking place to others. Absolutely, Carol. That's a good note to end on. So you guys have a great week, and I'll get this out on the newsletter on Saturday morning. And Amber, you'll get yours also. And thanks for the evening, and we'll see you all next Thursday night, and we'll see some of you hopefully on Sunday afternoon.